I sat down next to my dad on the steps of Alice Robertson Middle School, and he looked over at me and said, how did we get into this mess? I can explain. See, I wasn't very good at algebra in 8th grade. Okay, well, I wasn't really good at algebra in any grade, but this story takes place in 8th grade. Truthfully, I shouldn't have been in Algebra 1 in 8th grade. I should have been in pre-algebra. But my parents and I thought that taking Algebra 1 would be a good challenge. It was not. Sometimes playing up makes you stronger. Sometimes it ruins your life, and the latter was true for me in 8th grade. Don't get me wrong, I studied really hard. But the more I read and the more I tried, the more I could I couldn't get it. It just did not make sense to me. And looking back, it's probably the first time I failed at something, which they say builds character and all. But when you're in the middle of failure, you don't want character. You just want to know what the function of X is. So halfway through the semester, I got desperate. And with a test looming, I did something I thought I'd never do. You see, there was this kid in my class. I sat next to him. We'll call him Mark because that was his name. And Mark was a guy. He was like the guy on the inside who could get you stuff, right? I don't know how he did it. But it was pretty common knowledge that if you needed something, somehow, some way, Mark would be the guy to get you it. And so this is true. Years later, Mark would be the first guy that I knew with a CD burner and Napster. That meant for $20, he could get you a compact disc with Limp Bizkit and Mambo No. 5 on it. My reaction as well. It was common knowledge at AR that Mark had a cheat sheet on test days. A small little piece of paper fit in the palm of your hands, no frills, just the necessary numbers. And if you asked Mark, and for the right price, he would let you use that cheat sheet. So one day after class, I caught him in the hall and I said, hey. First of all, what's the crack? Second of all, can I get one of those cheat sheets for the right price? I'll pay anything. I'm desperate. And so Mark and I, standing there against our lockers, worked out a plan for the test the next morning. Now, this was not the first time I'd ever been trapped. And unfortunately, it wasn't the last. And I can tell you that no matter how big or small my trappings might be, when I lean on my own understanding and when I try to outsmart the situation, well, it's kind of always a recipe for disaster. I mean, confession would be too messy, right? And obeying would be just too embarrassing. So I just try to dig my heels in and look for a shortcut. But I tell you, there were no shortcuts in Algebra 1. You had to show your work. And there are no shortcuts in living a life of contrast either. And to be honest, my playbook's just not very big. When I'm caught in a sin, there's only a few things that I can do if I'm going to try to do it myself. And the first one is I'll just try to hide it. I mean, search histories can be deleted after all, right? And I think, well, if I just do enough good things, maybe that will distract people from who I really am. But I tell you, I can't memorize enough worship songs to help me sleep at night. And if I can't hide it, then I'll try to fix it, right? I'll say yeah, this is it. I got it now. That time was the last time. I'm never going to do that again. But then a week, 10 days later, I find myself saying, okay, no, that was the last time. We're never ever going to do that again. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't pull the bear trap off of my legs. I couldn't clean up my own mess. And I'm like my 2-year-old daughter who has taken to changing her own diapers. And she's not very good at it. And so I find myself standing there like her with, all over my hands, dressed like Donald Duck. And if I can't hide it, I can't fix it, well, maybe I can just ignore it. Like maybe if we just sit here and we just don't draw attention to it. Like don't talk about it. Let's just pretend that it's not here and it's not real. And if I just close my eyes, maybe the monster will go away. And I think if we just keep our mouth shut, maybe this problem will just magically take care of itself. Like acne or America. But my own heart gives me away. And I find myself in the garden, and God walks through and he calls my name, and I know that I'm just naked and ashamed. Which is why I find John's word in our text this evening so comforting. I mean, John starts, this is 1 John chapter 2, right? He starts the text by saying this. It's 3 words I want you to pay attention to. My dear children. Can I tell you that I think John says so much with just those 3 words. My. It's interesting that John says my because that implies a relationship. He didn't say, hey, you guys. He didn't say, you over there. He said, my. Guys, that's commitment. That's covenant. I guess it turns out that you are your brother's keeper after all. And if I can skip to the end of the night, I want you to know that I'm going to ask you to confess some stuff tonight. When you do, I hope that on the other side of the door that you find an adult or a friend or a group of friends that says, hey, we love you. This is about us, and you're not going through this alone. Dear, you hear the compassion, the concern, the love. John wants the best for his readers. And I don't know what it is, but sometimes when someone confesses something or comes clean, we just want them to get the full punishment that they can possibly get. Like, yeah, you're in still, but we want you to pay to the fullest extent of this. And it's almost like, church, we communicate that confession is hazardous to your health. And it's no wonder that people stay in the dark so long. Children, inexperienced, naive, not very smart. Like we can admit that kids don't know a lot. And they're not supposed to know a lot because they're kids, right? I mean, we're all ex-children at some point, right? And I would admit that, and I would hope you would say the same thing, that you know a lot more now than you did when you were a kid. And that's the point. But we think that God calls us his children because he's being cute. And it is a tender term, and don't miss the affection. But I think God also calls us his children because he implies that we have a long way to go. That we don't know everything. And we're going to mess up. But the good news is that Christianity is not about getting everything right. It's about knowing who your Father is. Mark and I walked into the classroom and took our seats. The teacher began passing around the tests. One hit my desk, one hit Mark's. And Mark began taking the test with the cheat sheet. And of course, he was answering the questions at a supernatural pace. And when he had finished, he put his pencil down, and just as we had discussed in the hall the day before, he slowly put the cheat sheet on the floor, and he covered it with his shoe, and he slid it across the aisle to me. I then met his foot and put my foot over the cheat sheet, and brought it over to me. And as I bent down to pick up the cheat sheet and I returned to my desk, I found my teacher standing right there. She took the test and she took the cheat sheet and sent me home with a letter to my parents. That night, I threw myself on my parents' bed and I said, it's not fair. Mark had the cheat sheet. It's not my fault. And my dad said, did you cheat? No. I didn't have a chance. And I spent the next hour not talking about me, but talking about Mark. And Mark's the one. This is Mark's fault. Mark got me into this. And you think I'm bad? I'm not bad at all. Mark's the one that made the cheat sheet. How did he make that? I don't know. He's a bad dude. And I'd like to say that I've grown out of this act of every time I find myself trapped, pointing to someone else and saying, yeah, but at least I'm not that. In fact, that's the real bad thing over there. And I guess it's because rebels make really bad advocates. When we see here in the text, John continues. He says this, I write this to you so that you will not sin. John picked up a pen because he didn't want people to sin. And as we expected, sin is the culprit in this story, but not like you think, and not like I think. Because I don't know about you, but for me, a lot of times, it's not the big sins that trap me. It's those little ones. It's the small sins that I'll do and partake in, because as long as I can sin and say, yeah, but at least it's not that. And I'll say things like, yeah, but I mean, at least it's not like I'm sleeping with her. And yeah, I mean, come on, it was just a joke. It was just a joke, and I didn't say it to his face anyway. Or, he's the one that made the cheat sheet. And I'm convinced that Satan will never come to you and say, hey, put this on. Because we'd be like, no, you're the devil and that's a chain. But what he will do is he will say, hey, come on. Just put this on. Well, that's just paper. And what we'll do is we will put ourselves in chains because, well, it's not that. It's just this. And it's not like I'm just. And the weird thing about this, are you more like Hitler or Mother Teresa thing, is that it's spiritual quicksand. Because we feel like as long as I am somewhere on the grid, then I'm okay. And by default, I'm average. And no one calls out average. And no one has to have a heart-to-heart because they're average. And we kid ourselves, right? We say, yeah, I mean, okay, like, sure. Like, it's not like I moved to Calcutta and served the poor, but hey, I didn't start World War II either, though. And we find ourselves stuck between a Nazi and a nun, which is what they should have called The Sound of Music, and we don't even realize. We don't even realize how comfortable chains can be. And the funny thing about paper chains they don't stay paper for long. They grow up, and they become really, really serious. Dad, you don't understand. They're going to suspend me. With that, my dad nodded and left the room. I heard him go down the hall and make a phone call. And from what I could tell, he was not ordering a pizza. I know that because he said the word algebra more than he said the word pepperoni. And that's a context clue. But he came back into the room, and I was sitting on the bed, and he sat down beside me, and he said, son, we have a meeting tomorrow, okay, with your teacher and the principal, okay, and I'm going to go with you, okay. I thought you were ordering pizza. Okay, there are two things you need to know right now for the rest of this story to make sense. The first is this. My dad was and still is the most loyal man I've ever met. Dad is a guy who shows up to things. So when I was in 3rd grade, my Boy Scout leader was Freddie Wisner's older brother. Yes, that was his real last name. No, it was not easy to go through elementary school with a name like Wisner. But Freddie's older brother had been discharged from the Army. We don't know why, but we do know that he had a lot of free time on his hands. And so somebody thought, I have an idea. This young man has disgraced our nation. Let's have him teach young boys how to start fires. Private Wisner was relieved of his post. I'll wait. I was proud of that, and it's going to stay in there. Private Wisner was relieved of his post after one Boy Scout meeting when he took us into the bathroom at our elementary school and one at a time put us in the stall and had us fight him off as if he was a predator. That's a true story. And I was in 3rd grade, but I thought, I don't think there's a merit badge for this. The next week at the meeting, the regional director showed up. All the parents were lined against the walls, and he said, okay, we've got a problem. We've got these boys. They know how to fight. That's about it. Can anybody fill in? Now, my dad, on the way to the school, the 3 houses between my house and the school, had told me as we walked there, hey, listen, bud, I can't help out. I've got too much going on. Work is too busy right now. I would love to help. You know that I would, but I just can't. Okay. But when the regional director said, can anybody help out, who raised their hand? My dad. Because he showed up. The second thing you need to know is my dad grew up in that town. He had went to the same middle school that I had gone to 25 years earlier. There were still teachers teaching when I was there that had taught Danny Epperson 25 years earlier. And of course, he was a legendary student. Every kid embarrasses their parents at some point. That was my day. So when my dad walked into that principal's office with me, he wasn't just going for me. He was putting his reputation on the line. Now, does that even come close to what Jesus did for me, for you? Of course not. But as I look back on that morning, it really does show me what an advocate does. John continues, he says this, but if anyone does sin, spoiler alert, we all will. We have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ, the righteous one. He is the atoning sacrifice for our sins. And not only for us, but also for the sins of the whole world. An advocate is such a powerful position, such a fascinating word. You see, when John was writing this, there were advocates, and what they would do is that they would be people of position or authority or stature in a town or a city. And they would stand beside someone who had none of that, a marginalized person, a person with nothing to his or her name. And they would walk into a courtroom with them, and they would put their arms around them, and they would say, my reputation is his. My stature is his. They're with me. And that means this. If you claim Jesus as your advocate, I want you to know that he is not ashamed of you. And Jesus is not embarrassed to be seen with you. But instead, in your darkest moments, in the secret places that you don't want anybody to know about, Jesus slides up beside you and he puts his arm around you and he says, she's mine. And that knowledge should fill you with this incredible mixture of joy and humility. The writer of Hebrews in 4:16 says that with Christ we have the confidence, the boldness to enter the presence of God, because we know that we are so messed up, but so loved by Jesus. We walked into the principal's office, and I sat down in an oversized chair, and the adults exchanged pleasantries. My teacher was already there. And as I got settled in, the principal walked behind his big desk and fluffed his tie as he sat down, and my test was sitting on his desk, and he looked over his glasses at me and then at the test, and he picked it up and he looked right at me and he said, "Do you have a cheat sheet?" And I sheepishly answered, "Yes." And I don't know if it was the mahogany, but something about that moment, like it just weighed on me, you know? I realized just how trapped I was, and I hated what I had done, and I hated how I had embarrassed my dad, and most of all, I just hated algebra. The principal looked at me and started into a lecture, telling me about how big of a cheater I was and how I would never succeed at anything. And if I kept going on down this road, I'd end up as like a washout and a burnout, and I'd embarrass the whole town, and cheating's no way to get ahead. You should be so ashamed of yourself. And at that point, my dad said, "Now hold on, Ed, that'll be about enough." He called the principal by his first name. This just got real. And you know what? It might be time for you to call Satan by his first name too. Because Satan, actually, if you translate it, means the accuser, which means that he makes his living telling you just how bad you are. And you know his voice because it comes at the most inopportune times, and he whispers into your ear and he says, hey, I saw that. I know what you did. And everyone else, if they knew, they would. There's no way you'd get to do the things that you do, and no one would like you. And look, you might try to be really good, but that thing, you're never going to outlive that thing. That thing defines you. But if we listen closely in those moments, there's another voice that says, I know what you did. And I was there. And that thing does not define you because I paid for it. And your identity is in me. And guys, if we are in Christ, the only thing Satan can do to you is accuse you. Listen to the other voice. Now that'll be just enough about that, Ed, my dad kind of said. My principal was kind of reeling from an adult calling him by his first name in the presence of a minor. And my dad then threw a curveball and says, I have an idea. Let's let him take the test again, right here in your office. And if he doesn't do well, you can move into pre-algebra, but suspending him, that doesn't help anybody. This sounded like a terrible idea. I didn't want to take the test again, or for the first time, actually. But the adults seemed to think that it was a fine idea. And so they left the room, and I slid around behind the principal's desk and took the test. 15 minutes later, I walked out of the front doors of Alice Robertson Middle School. My dad was sitting on the steps. How'd you do? I made a 55. And he said, oh, no wonder you cheated. And then he said this. He said, I knew you weren't going to do well, but I needed you to know it too. My own father threw me to the wolves. But to be honest, it was probably the only way I'd ever learn. And isn't it funny how similar discipleship and discipline sound? I sat down next to my father on the steps of Alice Robertson Middle School, and he said, Eric, how do we get into this mess? I shrugged, and I don't know. He said, you know I'm your dad, right? And my job as your dad is to protect you. But you gotta let me do my job. I know. Why didn't you tell me you were struggling? And then I said one of the things I've said a million times when I found myself trapped and have been confronted on it. I didn't know what to say. I thought you'd be mad. I didn't think you'd understand. I thought I could fix it on my own. I just didn't think it was this big a deal. My dad looked down at the ground and said, you know you're going to need to move to pre-algebra, don't you? Oh, no. No, not pre-algebra. No, I didn't want to go to pre-algebra. I didn't know how I would tell my friends or explain it to them or live with that failure every day when I walked past the Algebra 1 class and into the pre-algebra class. I just didn't know how I'd do it. But my dad wasn't punishing me. He was freeing me. And I ultimately went to pre-algebra, not because he made me or he forced me to do it. No, I went to pre-algebra because I trusted him. And I trusted him because I saw what he had done for me. And I want you to know that Jesus got a hold of me the exact same way. And John finishes our text this evening by saying this: we know that we have come to know him if we keep his commands. Whoever says, I know him, but does not do what he commands is a liar. And the truth, it's not in that person. But if anyone obeys his word, love for God is truly made complete in them. And this is how we know we are in him. Whoever claims to live in him must live as Jesus did. I can't tell you the number of years that I went through life trying to follow Jesus, thinking that I had just kind of somehow squeaked in, that I had figured out like a cheat code through the cross. And then I was in, and I'd go to heaven and those kinds of things, but only because I just kind of gamed the system. And God was still kind of mildly disappointed in me. And so I would do good things to try to make him smile at me. But I can't tell you how backwards that is. We do good things not to earn his love. We do good things because we trust him because of his love. And I have a feeling that Jesus might be sitting next to you saying, hey, I need you to trust me on this. I need you to fill in the blank. And we say, oh, no. Not that. I don't want to do that. I just want to keep it a secret. And can you imagine knowing what he has done for us to look at him and say, I know you want that, but I'm good. I got it figured out. And Jesus looks at us and says, it's my job to protect you. Will you please let me do my job? And gang, I've followed Jesus for a long time. And I know that he wants us to have life and life to the fullest. And can I tell you that every time I followed his advice and listened to him and did what he asked me to do, even when I didn't understand it, especially when I didn't want to do it, he has never let me down. Let him do his job. And look, I don't know how you got into this mess, but I know the way out.